Hello, everyone. So I think we should start. So I think everybody knows who is Max, and Laura was introduced as well. So let's start talk. Since Max had already his time, I would like to give some minutes to Laura for introductory remarks. And could you tell us a little bit more about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals?
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And very first off, I'd like to say thank you to the co-founders of Digital Freedom Festival. It's a tremendous opportunity to be here. I think if those who were paying attention or attended the opening segment, one of the things that they mentioned was that they've decided to align the festival with the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. How many people in the room know what these are? Okay. Well, so the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015 by 193 member states at the UN. And there's 17 goals, and they address every single one of the most important issues on the planet right now, from poverty reduction, extreme hunger, health, education, gender equality, access to water, renewable energy, saving the planet, everything you can imagine, climate change, sustainable cities. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that these goals were not handed down from a few member states. These goals were the results of the largest, longest consultation process ever undertaken on the planet. Starting in 2013, 100 countries undertook multi-stakeholder negotiations in their countries to understand what the key issues were, and this was followed by extensive expert and non-expert driven consultations to define what are the key challenges that we're trying to address on the planet. There's 17 goals, 169 targets. If you don't know them, I really do recommend that you look them up and find yourselves within the goals, because one of the key principles of the goals is that all stakeholders, everybody, can be part of this agenda. And I would dare say right off the bat, Max, thank you for suggesting a new social contract. I think that you can all actually look at the Sustainable Development Goals as a source, a template for that social contract, because within that social contract, one of the primary principles is to leave no one behind on this planet, and that gets very closely to some of the issues that you addressed. I also want to thank Max for showing you the Primavera sound video, because that festival, that integrated equality, gender equality, security, and environmental principles was actually a partnership with my team, the UN SDG Action Campaign. And our goal is to encourage everybody, every stakeholder, from national governments to local governments to church groups to the tech community, to get involved in backing this agenda, because it provides a template for the solutions to all of the problems that we're looking for.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. Now going back to our panel's name, Sustainable Technologies equals Sustainable Life. Now, this is my question to Max and Laura as well. What is sustainable technologies? Is any technology sustainable per se in definition, or there are some criteria?
So I'll take that one first. Yeah, so I'll just go back to my presentation. I mean, sustainability is a kind of is a very broad term, but a sustainable technology, I think, if you think about it in the modern way that technology is designed and iterated, is technology that is adaptable to all of our lives and takes account of the things like the UN Sustainability Development Goals in all of what it does. There's some really good organizations, for example, ethical.os, that produce a framework for technology design, looking at various things that kind of map similarly to the goals. And I think they look at things like surveillance, about equality. I think a sustainable technology is one that is designed with responsible principles and getting kind of the experiences of all the users involved in it to make sure it's protected from harm, as well as offering the great opportunities that it does.
Laura?
Well, first of all, going back to the principles of what is sustainable, sustainability means making use of resources we have today without compromising the future. And so if we look at the technologies that we currently have on our planet, we know that we're really pushing planetary boundaries in the environment, in the use of land on the planet, and pushing out other species on the planet. So first and foremost, we need to assess our personal responsibility within that and what kind of footprint we're having. With respect to technologies, we also don't have to just think about high tech and the tech community. Sometimes the most sustainable, important technologies are the lowest tech. I mean, I guess you wouldn't call a tree technology, but a tree provides some of the greatest solution to climate change that we have. Rather than looking for other things to capture carbon from the atmosphere, we can just start with what nature has provided.
And just adding to that, the Primavera example is such a good example because it's a music festival that not only did it have those goals around equality and working with your team, it embedded them through everything it did. So little changes here and there could make a big difference. It would seem like sustainable technology does that. It kind of makes changes and little differences wherever possible.
And how do you explain the notion sustainable life? And is it set, so to say, already set in stone, or is it an ever-changing notion?
Well, I think that a sustainable life is a regularly changing notion. It's checking in with what our values are as a society in this moment, and that does shift over time. I think that we've learned a lot over the last several decades about social inclusion, for instance. And so the notion of what a sustainable life is, yes, it does change. But I think that we all have further that we can go in terms of understanding our own personal responsibility within how to live. And so I think that a sustainable life, we tend to think about some of the quick wins, I suppose, are like, do I turn off the tap when I'm brushing my teeth? Do I ride my bicycle to work instead of driving my car? These are some of the kind of standard go-to solutions for, yes, how you can reduce your carbon footprint. But I think we're all here today in this environment to push our boundaries a little bit. How can we bring these sustainable principles into our work, into our dream, into our life vision for the impact we want to have on this planet? And that goes far beyond my impact as if my own personal carbon footprint, for instance. It's what am I going to dedicate my life to? And maybe if I'm in an industry that's not fulfilling me, or I don't feel that I'm really delivering for a better planet, a better world, a better social good, maybe I can shift my career. And so I think that it's really getting to the bigger picture of our mission here on the planet.
I think, yeah, I completely agree. And everybody makes decisions, as I said, everybody makes decisions every day in their lives that affect other people in their work, whether you're starting off your career or you're more advanced in your career. And if you kind of reroute those around concepts like sustainability, it can lead to a good thing. But I also don't think it should absolve big companies and governments from taking proper action on these things. There's an interesting kind of shift that I was reading about the other day that on the climate crisis, for example, because the evidence is so overwhelming and seen now, one of the shifts in the climate denial camp is to focus on personal responsibility and try and think, it's your responsibility to kind of not use a plastic water bottle, whereas it's governments who need to take the big action to change. But I think there's also kind of activism and mini activism and pressure that you can do through the economy and through campaigning. And Greta Thunberg is like the obvious example about how you can start very small and kind of create big change. And it's really interesting where her message is going and how clear that her message is to governments and to businesses, and it's not to individuals to change, but it's to them to kind of give voice to that, I guess, anger about climate.
You, Max, talk a little bit about the politics, but what about media? What can media do to facilitate those sustainable development goals and sustainable life?
Yeah, I'll take that. So one of the best examples actually is my former employer, Sky. So it had a kind of big campaign called Sky Ocean Rescue, where the aim was to reduce the amount of plastics in the ocean significantly. And that, again, I think kind of they're a media company that used their power on Sky News to educate people about plastics in the ocean and to campaign. They used the power of media companies to get out there and to their ability to know how to sell a message to change it. But also importantly, it wasn't just a kind of, I'm a bit fed up with the kind of corporate social responsibility of the last 10 years, which is we're going to sponsor some goalposts over here or some sports equipment, but not really going to do anything inherent to our business. But what I really liked about what Sky did was actually it completely changed its supply chain, taking out plastics from the television boxes it sent to people, from production facilities, so that the studios in the Sky studios were powered by wind power, and then also took out all things like plastic cups and plastic cutlery from the whole site, which has something like 10,000 people in London. So it's seeing it as a holistic change, and media companies kind of not just telling the message, but living the message as well is important.
Was there any followers to your in this direction to Sky? Has the media followed?
Has other media followed? Yeah. Well, I think it's a kind of shared message that in the UK, at least, the BBC had lots of documentaries on the issues as well. But I think Sky as like a pan-European media organisation is important, trying to spread that through all the markets it operates in, like Germany and Italy and Ireland.
Thanks. I think that's really fascinating. Thank you so much for the emphasis on both the role of government and corporate responsibility within this domain to go well beyond the kind of greenwashing of their work. I think with respect to media, we had a panel here earlier about fake news. I think all of us are getting hungrier and hungrier for real information. First of all, obviously fact-checking is one thing, but I'm finding more and more reporting simply on what people have said. Opinions are important, they matter, they drive politics, but how about some real data? I mean, if we're going to actually stick to these goals, if we set quantifiable goals for ourselves as a planet, we have to know how we're doing, and frankly, people don't have very much accurate information in popular media about how we're doing. There's a lot of misinformation. Even activists are sometimes misrepresenting how bad the situation is, which is good to drive action, but it's also fueling this sense that we don't have any hope left. The situation is so dire that we're not making any progress, and therefore I might as well watch a stupid cat video instead of informing myself about how, well, actually, I can do something in my neighborhood to save species right here in my backyard. So I think that more information, more data, more factual reporting about the state of the world can help to drive change.
So would you like to say that media has to change their agenda in order to help societies to develop those sustainable way of living? Do we need more good news? That would.
I think it's difficult. We need to look at what the drivers of news production are as well. So an advertising industry is a big driver of that. So we've heard a lot today about the attention economy, but I think advertisers need to be much more responsible in where they place their advertising, in not thinking about I'm going to kind of try and get my advertising everywhere on the web, and I'm going to basically incentivize clickbait. Or it's not even clickbait, it's news that is like the more views it gets, the more money it makes for the media organization. I don't necessarily have an answer at the moment, but I think we need to think more about separating out those things that like the news of the past was very much about you buy a newspaper and it was a product you were buying, and subscription services are a bit like that. But in general, the way people can, the thing that gets kind of pushed up is the thing that's going to make the most money. And it's very important that kind of big platforms that like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook don't push things up, don't recommend things that are harmful, and actually actively turn off kind of recommendation and move away from that direct feeling that I need to make money out of this content immediately.
I think that the media have a huge role to play, of course. I think that a strong independent media is the bedrock of a successful democracy, and we've been seeing how that's been eroding in a number of countries, and it's not necessarily, I'm not blaming the media at all, actually, but I think that the digital freedom in itself has actually been slightly driving that change. I mean, we saw in Brazil, populist leader was elected, he didn't ever even attend the national debates in the media. He was elected primarily through WhatsApp. And so the role of media, yes, it's changing, and it's becoming, I would say, more important than ever, because people have access to so much information, but they need to know where to get good, credible sources of information. And traditionally, the media have been that source for the people. And so I think that, you know, making it clear what kind of fact-checking efforts are underway is helpful for people. You know, we're trying to raise children in this environment to give them some sense of what to believe in life, and I think that the more that we can build the credibility of media, the more that we will still maintain active and successful democracies.
And one of the sustainable development goals is about, I would say, about politics as well, which asks people to think what they choose, which leaders. And my question would be, just let me mixed up. Do people need be more active politically and ask for media and for politicians to think more about sustainability?
Yes, and I think that, I mean, this movement that we're seeing right now with Greta and the Fridays for Future movement, I think that people are becoming activated in a way that they haven't in a lot of countries. We do see some rise in political activism. I think that is a super important and positive development. What I'm starting to see that I'm a little bit more excited about is non-traditional people actually moving into politics. If you're super frustrated with what's happening in your community, maybe you're a good candidate for government. You're educated. You don't have to have a background in law to run for office. All of the people here are driving change within their own societies. Maybe you could actually drive that change in a different way by joining the establishment and actually shaking things up a little bit. And I think that we've also seen some positive changes in that regard in different countries. We've seen a number of young leaders come to the fore who we would not have necessarily expected to be in that role. And so I think that we should also take cues from the tech community, and that young people have a lot to offer in this domain, and that politics is a channel that we can move into.
There was a session earlier on the future stage about slow economy, and there's been stuff around slow thinking. I think what that tells us is we need much more long-term thinking in politics and a much more considered policy program. So the Tony Blair Institute is all about renewing the centre ground of politics in the UK and more broadly globally as well. And we believe the only way to do that is to give people a kind of considered and radical vision, and that the centre ground and progressive politics can't just be just in the middle and just in between the left and the right. It has to give you something that changes the institutions that have failed people in the past. But you need to rest that on kind of considered policy and evidence-based thinking, which we've missed in the last few years as you kind of retreat to sound bites.
How optimistic are you, Max, about society's need for centric politics?
I think you have to be optimistic, because it's my political view. So I think I wouldn't be. You have to be optimistic, but it's difficult. I would say that optimism shouldn't shadow the real hardships that are in people's lives and the problems of things like globalization. That doesn't mean you kind of shake up the system and throw the whole thing away, because that's really difficult and also kind of quite destructive and often harms the people who may be voting for the populist policies in the first place. But really focusing on their issues and addressing some of the challenges in a considered and way that gives them answers. The reason why I kind of work for Tony Blair is I still believe in the way he thinks about politics, which is that it should be considered and make a difference to people's lives and technical, but it should also be sellable to them to make them vote for it as well. And that's how I think you win the centre ground back.
And Laura?
I'm also very optimistic. I don't think you can have this kind of job if you're not an optimist. But I think I tend to agree, and I mentioned it earlier, I think that evidence-based policymaking is the way of the future. It doesn't need to be politically based. It's taking evidence from your community that you can make a change. And I think that some inspiration I've seen is the City of New York, under Mayor Bloomberg at the time, all of his heads of department were given budgets to just pilot what they wanted to try it out, see what comes back, and then the mayor would happily invest, sometimes it's private money, to actually introduce that policy. And I think that that's another thing that we can draw from the tech community into the world of politics, is that you need startups, you need to test policies as much as you test other domains, and therefore having some room for experimentation, which is very challenging in a political environment, because our politics have tended to go more and more ideologically, and we need space for actual experimentation, potential success and potential failure to drive real policy change and real impact.
So we should end on a good note. Thank you very much for discussion, and I wish you luck in your everyday job.
Thank you.
Thank you.